Story number 1. The shadows in the basement. You're alone in your basement bedroom. The Nebraska winter howling outside. The heater creaks, rolling on its own, and something whispers your name from the closet. This all happened when I was in high school in my parents' house. You pull the blankets tight, but the whispers grow louder, joined by a tapping on the walls, too close to your head. And I feel like I have always been a little sensitive to the paranormal, but this house took it to an entirely new level. A shadow shifts in the corner, small but human, watching you, waiting for you to look. I have always believed in ghosts, always been obsessed with ghost shows like Ghost Hunters and A Haunting, always loved scary movies, and always said that Halloween was my favorite holiday. You know you shouldn't have touched that Ouija board, but now it's too late. The basement is theirs. So when two of my best friends asked me if I wanted to use a Ouija board, of course, I said yes. Every night they grow bolder, and you're not sure you'll ever sleep again. Now, in hindsight, this was not one of the best decisions I've ever made. The basement is no longer yours. It belongs to them. We went out late at night, and the small town we lived in had a cemetery right in the middle of town. You were always drawn to the spooky, but the Ouija board changed everything. So that's where we went, which I just feel like was definitely stacking the odds against us. That night in the cemetery, the air turned sour, a child's laugh echoing, a voice too dark to be human answering your questions. But like high school kids, you know, there's not really much need to give you details about the experience, because what happened afterwards is what's spooky. You swore off the board, but it followed you home. But just know that we heard a creepy child's laughter and spoke to a known Ouija board demon, and it was enough to make me never want to touch one again. That first night, the basement felt alive. The heater rolling across the linoleum, unplugged. Now, the activity in my house started at night as soon as I got home. You hid, refusing to look, knowing better than to invite it in. So, I had to believe that they were connected. The shadows are restless, and they know you're afraid. In my parents' house, my brother and I stayed in the basement, and our rooms shared a wall. The cold seeped through the walls. The heater, your only warmth, but it wasn't enough. This was in a small town in Nebraska in the dead of winter, so it was super cold. The noises grew outside your room. An old pencil sharpener spun, its handle grinding. And in the basement, we had one of those small infrared heaters on wheels. Inside, a mason jar slid across your dresser, back and forth, relentless. And that night, I heard the heater rolling around on the linoleum floor. You stayed still, heart pounding, refusing to glance at the closet. But me having seen enough scary movies, I knew that the last thing you wanted to do was check out the spooky noise or acknowledge the thing making said spooky noise. The jar's movements grew violent, scraping the wood. But you waited for dawn. So I stayed in my room super freaked out and hid under my blankets. Morning revealed gouges on the dresser, proof it wasn't your imagination, baby. That was the first night. They're not just noises. They're watching, waiting. And as time continued, things just got progressively worse. You kept silent, fearing your family's doubt. But the basement grew bolder. Do you guys remember the old metal pencil sharpeners that you used to have to spin the little handle to sharpen the pencil? Taps echoed on the wooden paneling by your bed, rhythmic, insistent. For whatever reason, our house had one of those mounted on one of the pillars outside my room. Something heavy, like a cat, pressed on your mattress. But nothing was there, and this would start rotating at night as well as the heater. Your name whispered from the closet, soft but clear, every night. Then inside my room, I had a mason jar that sat on top of my dresser in my closet. The TV on your bookcase clicked, its buttons pressed by unseen hands, loud in the dark. This started moving around at night like back and forth on top of a wooden dresser. You were unraveling. Sleep a distant memory, the shadows growing stronger. Like I said, I had already decided I was never going to acknowledge the spooky ghost, so I wouldn't even look in its direction. Doris, they're in your dreams now, and they're not leaving. And this would go on for what felt like hours at a time. One night, a nightmare broke you. A girl in your closet, a boy by your hip, a shadow man tapping the wall, another by the TV, staring. And the longer I ignored it, the more aggressive the mason jar got. You woke, shaking, unable to keep it in. I never looked at it until morning. You told your brother, and his eyes widened. He'd seen the boy in the same dream, pressing the bed. And after one particularly rough night, when I looked at my dresser in the morning, there were scrapes on top of it from the mason jar. He heard the heater, the sharpener, the whispers, and saw you sit up, talking to something in your sleep. This had me all the way messed up. Across the basement, in the storage room's doorway, he saw a shadow man, sometimes closer, watching you, but I still hadn't said anything to my family about it. Your mother admitted hearing whispers, your name called when alone. They believe in the paranormal, but they had already told me the house was fine, so I didn't want to bring it up. The basement wasn't fine, it was theirs. But now there was a tapping on the walls at night. The shadows are yours, and they won't let go. My bedroom has wooden paneling in it, and I would hear taps next to my head. You confided in your boyfriend, now husband, but the story gave him a headache, vanishing when you stopped. Now also, you know how it feels when your cat jumps on your bed and starts walking around trying to find a spot to lay down. Speaking out dulled the activity, but it never stopped. I would feel that at night, too. You moved to an apartment, and the basement fell silent the night you left. But there would be no cat, which was sufficiently creepy. Your clocks fell once, shattering, but nothing followed. But to make matters worse, I started to hear my name being whispered at night from my closet. You searched the house's history, rumors of a family, children lost to illness, a father's grief, but no proof. This was happening every night, and even though I wasn't acknowledging it, it was getting worse. A neighbor spoke of noises before you moved in, whispers in the dark. I'm even getting chills recalling it now, as it freaks me out so profoundly. You posted online, finding others with basements that stirred, shadows that lingered. On the left side of my bed, I had a huge wooden bookcase that my grandparents had made for me because I love reading. They're gone, but they're not forgotten. And on top of that bookcase was an old little flat-screen TV with buttons on the back of it that was super loud when you pressed them. You live in a bright apartment now, far from Nebraska's chill. Those buttons started being pressed at night, too. You avoid basements, dark corners, the quiet of night. So, at this point, I'm hearing the heater and the pencil sharpener, taps on my wall, whispering in my closet, TV buttons pressing and feeling stuff crawl into my bed. You dream of the girl, the boy, the shadow man, their faces fading but present. And as you can guess, I'm a mess. You joined a paranormal group, their stories echoing yours. Ouija boards, basements, things that follow. My breaking point was one specific night when I had a super vivid nightmare. A local historian mentioned your street, old homes with heavy pasts, but no names. In the nightmare, I'm in my room and I'm looking around, and as I do, I see a little girl huddled in the corner in my closet. You write, share, warn others of boards, of shadows. A little boy standing by my bed and pressing on it. You don't sleep deeply, don't trust closed doors, and a shadow man behind my bookcase looking right next to the TV. The basement is behind you, but its weight isn't, and a shadow man in the opposite corner tapping on the wall. You're free, but the basement lingers. It was absolutely terrifying. You work a desk job, live where light never fades, and at this point, I'm incapable of keeping it to myself anymore. You speak at community events, cautioning about the unseen, your story a shield. I start a conversation with my brother about the nightmare I had. Your blog grows, a haven for those who felt the dark. And this is where things get extra creepy, as if it wasn't bad enough already. You don't visit that house, don't walk old streets. I'm telling him about this nightmare, and his eyes go super wide as he's listening in. And he interrupts me and describes to me exactly what the little boy pressing on my bed looks like. The whispers, the taps, the shadows. They're with you, a scar you carry. We had the exact same nightmare. You hope they're at peace, but you know, some things don't leave the basement. So then I start telling him everything that's been happening to me. They watched you, and they're still out there. And he's nodding along, telling me that he hears the heaters, the pencil sharpener, and the whispers. You've rebuilt, found light, but the basement's mark is permanent. To make matters worse, he tells me that I was whispering along with the ghosts. You dream less, but when you do, it's the jar, the TV, the girl's eyes. I am completely dumbfounded and ask him what he means. You joined a community of believers, their stories mirroring yours, basements stirring, boards opening doors, and he tells me that he's seen me sitting straight up in bed, talking in my sleep to whatever was in my room, which is something I have no memory of whatsoever. A town elder spoke of old rituals, boards calling things that don't leave. That is all super scary, right? You write, you share, you live, but you listen, but it gets worse. The shadows are gone, but they're waiting somewhere for the next door to open. Right across from my brother's room, across the basement, was a storage room without a door. Story number 2, the orb in the doorway. The house was a relic, its walls steeped in shadows that moved when you weren't looking. We rented it when I was 10, a suburban home with creaking floors and too many mirrors. A man in black flickered past my desk. A woman in fleece vanished in my sight, and a glowing orb haunted my door. Each room held a secret, each night a new fear. This is the story of the house that watched us, and the light that knew my name. The air was thick with unease, the mirrors reflecting more than they should. I felt it from the start, a presence old, and heavy, lingering in corners. My room was a trap, its bed a source of pain, its walls a canvas for shadows that weren't mine. The house seemed alive, its noises deliberate, its silence oppressive. Something was here, not human, not animal, but aware, and it wanted us to know. From ages 10 to big, my family rented a house. It was a suburban home built decades ago. It was a nice-sized home in the suburbs, built in the mid-50s, I believe. It came furnished, mirrors everywhere. There were a lot of mirrors in that house, none of which my family put there. I saw them first at my desk. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a man in black walking slightly behind me. He vanished when I turned. When I turned around, there was nothing there, just myself staring back at me in a mirror. Another figure appeared, fleeting but vivid. I saw something. This time, a woman wearing a dark pink and purple fleece. Her form was clear, then gone. When I turned, no one was there. My first room was cursed. In my old room, I wasn't sleeping well. I fell ill, hospitalized. I had the stomach flu for a week, but it got so bad that I had to be hospitalized overnight. Recovery was swift away from that bed. Once I was in the hospital and had the IV, I stopped throwing up and recovered in a day. A light woke me one night, soft at first, then blinding. I woke up to a light illuminating the hallway. It moved toward me, alive. It was a large orb of shining light moving on its own. It paused at my door and, watching, knowing I saw it, it stopped at my doorframe as if it realized I were awake and staring. Fear froze me, my heart screaming danger. I truly felt like my life was in danger. I hit, and it left. I pulled my blanket over my head and waited for something terrible to happen. The Ouija board was a mistake. My grandmother and I made a makeshift Ouija board from cardboard paper. It answered, but we faltered. When we were done talking to the spirit, I told her we needed to say goodbye properly. She didn't. She lifted her fingers off the glass and said goodbye without moving the glass to goodbye first. We fixed it, but too late. We tried again and did it the right way. The house turned against us. The fridge was leaking water. No cause was found. They had no idea what was wrong, why the fridge was leaking or where it was leaking from. Footsteps echoed above. I would hear footsteps and rustling in the attic many times throughout the day. No one was there. I had my aunt go look, but no one was. Stink bugs invaded my room. Our house became infested with stink bugs. The house was alive, and it wanted us gone. We left, and after that, everything stopped. Story number 3. The Ouija's Warning. The rain tapped the windows, a soft rhythm in the dim room. We huddled around the Ouija board, its pink, kitten-covered surface absurdly cheerful. My fingers trembled on the planchette. Katie's eyes are wide beside me. Taylor's breath quick. Then it moved, fast, sharp, spelling a word that stopped my heart. Run! The air turned cold. The house too still, as if it knew something we didn't. We yanked our hands back, our laughter gone, replaced by a fear we couldn't name. Lauren and Sam. The older girls weren't smiling anymore, their faces pale, their eyes fixed on the board. The bathroom light across the hall flickered off, then on. A pulse in the dark. No one spoke, no one moved, but the planchette twitched. Alive, pulling toward me like it knew my name. I wanted to laugh, to call it a prank, but the air was heavy, pressing against my chest. The house creaked, its walls watching, its shadows too deep. Katie whispered my name, her voice shaking, but I couldn't look away from the board, from the thing we'd woken, the thing that wasn't done with us. The light flickered again, and a shape moved, small, quick, a shadow darting past the window. It wasn't human, wasn't right, a child-sized void that shouldn't be there. My heart pounded, my hands cold, my voice gone. We'd opened a door and something had stepped through, something that didn't belong in this world. This wasn't a game. Not anymore. The board, the house, the night, they were alive, and we were intruders, marked by something we couldn't see, couldn't fight. We ran, our footsteps loud, our screams silent, knowing whatever we'd touched was still there, waiting, watching from the dark. The first time I ever used a Ouija board, I was even. It was me and my two friends, Katie and Taylor, hanging out at Katie's house on a rainy afternoon. The house was warmy, cozy, a haven from the storm outside. At some point, Katie's older sister, Lauren, and her friend Sam called us upstairs, saying they had something to show us. When we got to Lauren's room, they were sitting cross-legged on the floor with a talking board between them. It was pink and sparkly with a cartoon kitten in the middle. Definitely not what we expected a Ouija board to look like. We laughed, but they insisted we'd try it. We thought it was a joke, a silly game for a boring day. We all sat down in a circle and placed our fingers lightly on the planchette. And within seconds, it began to move fast. It slid smoothly across the board and spelt out one word: run. Katie, Taylor, and I all yanked our hands back at once, completely freaked out. Lauren and Sam burst out, laughing, saying they'd made it move to frighten us. Katie got mad and started yelling at them, accusing them of being immature. But their laughter died fast. But before anyone could respond, the bathroom light across the hall flicked off, and then a second later turned back on. Everyone froze. The room felt taller, the air thicker, like we'd crossed a line we couldn't see. Taylor tried to brush it off. Okay, you got us. We're done now. But this time, Lauren and Sam weren't laughing. They looked pale and tense. Their eyes were wide, their hands still, their confidence gone. Something had shifted. Then the planchette started to slide across the board again, but none of us were touching it. It moved slowly and deliberately across the board towards me. I was sitting opposite everyone else, just a few feet back. My heart stopped. My breath caught. "Ha ha, very funny," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You just pushed it with your foot or something." But Lauren and Sam didn't laugh. They didn't even move. They just stared at the board, both of their faces drained of color. Sam's mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. "That's not us." Then Lauren added, "Guys, go now." We didn't wait. We ran, our feet pounding down the stairs, the house creaking behind us like it was alive. The air was heavy, the shadows too sharp. And I knew something was wrong, something we'd called, something that wasn't leaving. We didn't need to be told twice. We bolted downstairs, not bothering to look behind us. Once outside, Taylor and Katie demanded to know if it was another prank, begging them to just admit it. But Lauren and Sam weren't talking. They were on the verge of tears, barely able to breathe and shaking. I couldn't stop shaking either, my hands cold, my mind racing out of instinct. I turned to look up at the bedroom window. The bathroom light switched off again, and then I swear to God I saw a small dark figure about the size of a child sprinting past the window. There was no one else home. Lauren and Katie's brothers were both away at college, and their dad was at work. Their mom still out running errands. That room should have been empty. That night, Katie and Taylor slept over at my place. Lauren stayed with Sam, and no one mentioned what happened again, not once. We never brought it up, never talked about it, not even years later. The memory was a weight, a secret we buried deep. Not long after, the three of us, me, Katie, and Taylor, had a major falling out, and I never saw Taylor again. It's been 18 years now. Katie and I reconnected on Instagram recently and chat occasionally, but we've never spoken about that night, and honestly, I'm not sure if I ever want to. The days after were strange, quiet, like the house had left a mark on us. Katie stopped smiling as much, her eyes always darting to corners, to windows. Taylor threw herself into sports, as if running could erase what we'd seen. I kept my distance, afraid to talk, afraid to stir something up. Lauren and Sam drifted away, their laughter replaced by a silence we all shared. The Ouija board was never mentioned, never seen again, but I knew it was there, hidden in Lauren's closet, a door we'd opened and couldn't close. I started noticing things, lights flickering in my house, shadows moving where they shouldn't. My mom brushed it off, blamed old wiring back, but I felt it, a presence that lingered, watching. I slept with the light on for weeks, my dreams filled with that figure, that child-sized shadow, its movements too quick, too wrong. I'd wake up, heart pounding, checking the windows, the doors. Sure, something was there, just out of sight. Years later, I searched for answers, diving into forums about Ouija boards, spirits, things that move in the dark. There were stories like ours, boards spelling warnings, lights flickering, figures seen and gone. Some called it a spirit, others a trick of the mind, but none had answers. Just fear. I found an old photo from that day, tucked in a box. Katie's house in the background, the window dark. I burned it, the flames curling around the edges, but the memory stayed sharp and cold. Katie and I talk now, but it's surface level, jobs, weather, life. That night is a shadow between us, unspoken, untouched. I wonder if she dreams of it too, if she sees that figure, if she feels it watching. Yeah, don't ask, don't want to know. Some things are better left buried, some doors better left closed, but I lock my windows every night, just in case. Story number 4. The Ouija's Echo. I used to live alone in my house, which itself is an area where not many people live. The solitude was a choice, a quiet retreat from the world's noise. But solitude has a way of turning on you, filling the silence with shadows. I was pretty bored as I hadn't been talking to my friends so much and wanted to do something exciting. Boredom was a dangerous spark, and I was about to light a fire I couldn't put out. That's when I saw the opportunity. The idea came like a whisper, tempting, reckless. I used to be fascinated by the concept of Ouija boards, though I wasn't a believer, but I still wanted to try it to see what would happen. I didn't believe in spirits, but the thrill was a lure, a dare to the unknown. The house was ready, and so was I, or so I thought. The night was a trap. The fateful night arrived. The darkness pressed against the window, heavy, believe. I set my plan in motion. The house was my accomplice. Its silence a canvas for my experiment. First, I needed the board itself, and after a quick internet search for designs, I crafted my own makeshift Ouija board out of a sturdy piece of cardboard. It was crude, letters scrawled in marker, but it felt real enough. It wasn't fancy, but I figured it would suffice. I placed it on the floor, a portal to something I didn't understand. As darkness settled, I prepared the room. The air was thick, expectant, as if the house knew what I was about to do. The location was already unnervingly quiet, typical for such a secluded spot, and especially so late at night. The world outside was still, too still, a void waiting to be filled. The candle was my mistake. The only sounds were the occasional chirps and buzzes of insects outside, which only served to amplify the silence within. The insects were a chorus, mocking my solitude. To add to the atmosphere, I lit a single candle. The flame flickered, casting jagged shadows on the walls. Why? I'm not entirely sure. Perhaps I thought it would make the experience more authentic. Or maybe I wanted the darkness to feel alive. Or maybe I just liked the eerie glow it cast with the curtains drawn and the solitary flame being the sole source of light, painting the room in a dance of shadows and illuminating the quiet oppression. The candle was a beacon, inviting something I wasn't ready for. Heart pounding slightly, I began the session. My hands trembled. The planchette coiled under my fingers. I moved the planchette hesitantly, using prompts I'd seen on other people's online accounts. The words felt foolish, but the air was heavy with intent. The silence answered, but not with words. "Is someone here?" I asked into the stillness and waited, every nerve on edge, then proceeded with other inquiries, all of a similar nature. My voice was small, swallowed by the room. I gave it ample time, but the planchette remained stubbornly still. The board was silent, but the house wasn't. Despite the lack of physical movement, I was undeniably frightened. Fear didn't need proof. It grew in the quiet, fed by the candle's glow. The combination of the isolation, the candlelight, and the general strangeness of the situation had created a chilling atmosphere. The shadows danced, mocking my courage. My imagination was running wild, filling the silence with a sense of anticipation and dread. I was alone, but I wasn't, not anymore. The house turned against me. Then the unexpected occurred. The air shifted, a sudden weight pressing down. I was sitting on the floor facing the door to the room when I heard a loud and distinct bang. The sound was a gunshot, shattering the quiet. The metal latch on the door rattled sharply, and a shadow flickered in the sliver of light beneath the door, as if someone or something had moved past it. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was real, deliberate. It scared me more than I could have imagined. My heart seized, my breath a prisoner in my throat. My immediate reaction was to halt the whole thing. Panic was a tide pulling me under. I blew out the candle, and without a second thought, which I quickly realized was a huge blunder, plunged the room into complete darkness. The darkness was absolute, a void that swallowed me whole, I wasn't alone. Disoriented. I struggled to remember where I'd left my phone and scrambling to my feet, trying to find the way to the light switch. My hands fumbled, blind, desperate. That's when something else happened. The house came alive. It silenced a lie. It was fleeting. And I can't say for certain that it was, but I thought I heard footsteps in the room that weren't my own. They were sharp, quick, a sprint toward me. I was wearing socks, and my movements were almost muffled to a point of silence. My steps were whispers, but these were not. But these sounded like someone running, only for a brief moment, directly into my direction. The sound was a blade cutting through my panic. Panic seized me. I was prey, hunted in my own home. As soon as I finally found the switch and flooded the room with a light, I grabbed my phone and bolted. The light was salvation, but it couldn't erase the fear. I fled the room and retreated to the perceived safety of my bed. The bed was no refuge, its sheets cold with my dread. Sleep was a stranger. Sleep was impossible after that. My mind was a storm, replaying the bang, the shadow, the footsteps. My mind raced, replaying the events and wondering what exactly had taken place. What had I invited? Eventually, I managed to doze off after scrolling on my phone for a while, trying to calm my nerves. The phone's glow was a frail shield, its light a lie. Morning came, but it brought no peace. The next morning, my resolve was firm. The Ouija board was a curse, a mistake I couldn't undo fast enough. I wasted no time in disposing of the homemade Ouija board, throwing it straight into the trash. See, the trash bin was a grave, but it wasn't enough. I wanted nothing more to do with it. I thought I was free, but the house had other plans. The echo lingered. 2 nights later, I woke up in a daze and found myself standing in the outside corridor of my house. The night air was cold, the corridor a foreign place. It's possible I had sleepwalked, but the realization sent a shiver down my spine. My body had betrayed me, drawn to something I couldn't see. I quickly returned inside and locked the door, and haven't touched a Ouija board since. The lock was a ritual, a plea for safety. The house is quiet now, but it remembers. I don't live alone anymore, but the silence still feels alive, waiting for me to make another mistake. The Ouija board is gone, but its echo remains, a whisper in the dark. Don't play with the unknown. Don't light that candle. Story number 5. The Voices Beyond the Board. The basement was our portal, but it opened to something we couldn't control. My name's Casey, a high school kid caught in a web of fascination with the supernatural. My high school days were marked by a shared fascination among my friends and me with the supernatural. We chased ghosts in the dark, reckless and naive. It became a regular activity for our group. The Ouija board was our key, but it unlocked more than we bargained for. We'd gather in someone's basement or bedroom, dim the lights. The first time, the air turned to ice. We were in the middle of a conversation with the board when suddenly a wave of intense cold swept through the room. It wasn't natural. It clawed at our bones. It was a powerful, creeping cold that seemed to rise from the floor. My friend Jake's hand shook, his knife gleaming in the candlelight. My friend, visibly spooked, instinctively grabbed his hunting knife. Even his dog fled, a shadow in panic. Even his dog, normally calm and collected, bolted from the room. Something was here, and it wasn't welcome. The board spoke, and we listened. We cautiously asked the board if it had caused the sudden temperature to drop. Its answer was a blade to our courage. The planchette moved deliberately to spell out that it wanted us to feel how it had died by drowning in icy water. The cold wasn't just air, it was memory. A death we felt. The sheer intensity of the cold and the specific answer left us all shaken. We were no longer playing a game. The spirits knew too much. Our friend was deeply grieving the recent taking of her cousin's own life. Samantha's pain was raw, her hope fragile. She wanted to try and connect with them through the board. We kept her hands off to prove it was real. We made her agree not to physically touch the planchette. The board moved, spelling truths only the dead should know. The board remarkably began to spell out accurate details about her cousin, his name, his love, his end. It was all there. It gave his full name, his girlfriend's name, the college they had attended. The room wasn't ours anymore. We decided to ask the entity if it was physically present in the room. The question hung heavy, a dare to the unknown. As soon as the question was asked, the planchette turned sharply and pointed to a specific corner. The candles betrayed us, their flames bending. All the flames of the candles we had lit flickered and shifted in that exact direction. The corner was alive, a void we couldn't face. After that, we made a point to avoid that corner. The final night broke me. One of our more religious friends suggested we try contacting our guardian angels. We sought light, but I found darkness. Each person's angel revealed itself, each with names that sounded distinctly biblical. Their names were a comfort until it was my turn. When it was my turn, the name that came through was something else entirely. It was a name that tasted of ash, ancient and wrong. It had a distinctly demonic feel to it. The name was a weight I couldn't bear, echoing names like Beelzebub. It pressed against my chest, a gaze I couldn't escape. As an atheist raised Catholic, I didn't believe in demons, but belief didn't matter. The presence did. Something about this name unsettled me deeply. I wouldn't say it, afraid it would summon more. I refused to speak the name aloud. The room felt like a cage watched by something vast. It felt like a palpable presence. The board was a door I closed forever. These are just a few of the many strange encounters we had. Each left a scar, a question unanswered. I haven't touched a Ouija board in years now. My husband's board sits in our basement, a relic I avoid. My husband keeps one in our basement. I won't go near it. Won't risk those voices again. I refuse to be present whenever he and his friends decide to use it. The unknown is too real, too close. I searched X for Ouija stories, finding tales of spirits that linger, of names that bind. Some doors shouldn't be opened, and I opened one too many. Story number 6, The Shadows on the Board. The house was a relic. Its creaking floors a canvas for our reckless curiosity. It was sometime during the summer of a period marked by long, languid days and a sense of youthful invincibility, that the idea took root among our group of 5 friends. The summer nights were endless, fueling our thirst for the unknown, fueled by late-night talks of the paranormal and perhaps a touch of teenage bravado. We decided to construct our very own Ouija board. The idea was born in whispers, a dare to pierce the veil. The location for this potentially ill-advised endeavor was the house of one of our friends. The house stood apart, its history a whisper of secrets untold. The house itself held a certain mystique, and on the chosen night, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation and nervous energy. The room was a stage, set for the impossible. We gathered in the designated room, curtains drawn against the encroaching darkness of the summer night. The curtains sealed us in, the world outside forgotten. The only illumination came from the flickering dance of 5 humble candles casting long, distorted shadows. The candles flickered, their light a fragile barrier against the dark. The shadows danced, twisting into shapes that teased our nerves. We sat in a circle around our homemade Ouija board, a palpable sense of excitement mixed with growing unease settling in upon us. The board was crude, scrawled with letters and numbers, yet it pulsed with potential. I've always harbored a belief in the paranormal, a fascination with things that lie just beyond our everyday perception. The night was alive, its promise both thrilling and terrifying. I'd always chased the unseen, but doubt lingered, a skeptic's shield. However, on that particular night, a part of me remained skeptical, assuming that our amateur attempt at contacting the other side would likely yield nothing more than our own imaginations running wild. The board was a game, or so I told myself. We began the session, as most do, politely introducing ourselves and asking rudimentary questions, our fingers lightly resting on the makeshift planet. Our voices were tentative, the plancher a shared pulse. Initially, the responses we received were nonsensical jumbles of letters, leading me to suspect that one of us was subconsciously or perhaps even deliberately moving the planet. The movements were erratic, a joke we weren't all in on. The rational part of my mind sought a logical explanation, a way to demystify the experience before it even truly began. The room shifted, its air thickening with intent. But then everything shifted. The game was no longer ours, the board a gateway. The seemingly random movements of the planet coalesced into coherent answers directly responding to our inquiries. The plancher moved with purpose, spelling truths we didn't expect. A tangible shift occurred in the room. The air grew heavy, pressing against our chests. The air felt heavier, and a collective breath was held as we realized with a growing sense of disbelief that we had seemingly made contact. The realization was a jolt, binding us in shared awe. After a period of hesitant questioning, a sudden sharp scream pierced the stillness. The scream was a blade slicing through our fragile calm. One of my friends, his face pale with shock, pointed towards the staircase. His fear was contagious, his finger trembling. 3 of us were positioned with our backs to the stairs, oblivious to whatever had caused his outburst. We turned, hearts racing, blind to the horror. However, the remaining 2 confirmed his terrified calm. They'd seen a figure, fleeting and indistinct. Peering over the railing, their words painted a specter, vague yet undeniable, and not a fear tightened in my stomach. My skepticism crumbled, fear taking root, while the possibility of something supernatural was what we had sought. The actual manifestation sent a shiver of genuine apprehension down my spine. The house was no longer safe, its shadows a lot, but the experience did not conclude there. No, sir, the night had more to show, its grip tightening. A moment later, the lights in the adjacent bathroom began to flicker on and off with an unsettling rhythm. The flickering was rhythmic, a pulse of the unknown. The bathroom, however, was empty. The open doorway mocked us, revealing nothing. We could clearly see through the open doorway. There was no logical explanation for the erratic behavior of the lights. The emptiness was a lie, the lights a warning. It was at this point that a collective wave of fear washed over us all. Panic was a tide, sweeping us under. Panic, raw and instinctual, began to take hold. Our bravado shattered, instinct driving us. In our heightened state of alarm, we committed a cardinal sin of Ouija board etiquette. The mistake was grave, a breach of the unseen. Without uttering the customary goodbye, we abruptly broke contact with whatever entity we had engaged. The planchette was abandoned, our hands trembling, and driven by a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity, we rushed to investigate the bathroom. The bathroom was a void, its silence mocking, and the scene of the inexplicable light show. But the bathroom was, of course, utterly vacant, offering no clues nor explanations for how everything had transpired. The return was uneasy. The board, a magnet. A feeling of relief and unease remained, and we cautiously returned to the Ouija board. The board called us back, its pull irresistible. Despite our earlier fright, a strange compulsion drew us back. Curiosity warred with fear, a dangerous dance. We attempted to re-establish contact with the same entity, our figures hovering over the planet. The planchette was still, the room holding its breath. Initially, there was nothing but silence and the steady flicker of the remaining candles. The candles burned low, their light faltering, and then, with no discernible draft or external influence, 3 of the 5 candles abruptly extinguished themselves, plunging a significant portion of the room into deeper shadow. The darkness was a predator, closing in. The sudden darkness was punctuated by an even more startling occurrence. The room was alive, its shadows moving. The plastic lighter we had been using, which had been resting on the table beside the board, suddenly propelled itself halfway across the entire hallway, skittering and bouncing until it came to rest against the closed door of the very bathroom that had been the source of our earlier terror. The lighter's flight was impossible, a defiance of reason. At that point, a unanimous decision was reached. Fear united us, our limits clear. We were undeniably out of our depth. The game was over, its stakes too high. The playful curiosity that had initiated our experiment had been replaced by a genuine and overwhelming fear. The closure was desperate, a plea for peace. We finally remembered the importance of proper closure, and with trembling voices, we collectively said goodbye to whatever we had disturbed. The goodbye was a ritual, a hope to seal the breach, seeking solace in numbers and a return to normalcy. We craved safety, the familiar. We contacted other friends, and soon the house was filled with more familiar sounds and less oppressive shadows. Their voices were a lifeline, pushing back the dark. Yet, even with the arrival of our friends and the attempts at distraction, the unsettling events of the evening were not entirely over. The house was restless, its echoes lingering. Later, the lights upstairs in a part of the house that should have been unoccupied flickered, independently. Babaz. The upstairs was a final taunt, the night unyielding, and when some of us ventured upstairs to turn them off, several of the lights inexplicably switched themselves off before we could even reach them. The lights that mocked us, their dance, a farewell, that night remains etched in my memory. The memory is a scar, vivid and chilling, a vivid and unsettling experience that never fails to send a shiver down my spine whenever I recount it. The night was a lesson, a brush with the unknown. Thankfully, nothing more terrifying happened after that. The calm was a mercy, but the fear lingered. And I think it's best to not play with Ouija boards as a general rule. The house became a legend, its shadows a warning. I searched X for Ouija stories, finding tales of boards that opened doors best left closed. Some spoke of figures on staircases, others of objects moved by unseen hands. The night was a turning point. My belief in the paranormal no longer a game. I avoided the house. Its mystique, now a curse. But the shadows on the board followed me, a reminder of the night we dared to call the unknown, forever etched in our trembling hearts. Story number 7. The Curse of the Ouija Board. The dorm room feels too small, like the walls are listening. I'm a freshman at BSU, a skeptic with a fascination for the paranormal, always chasing logic before ghosts. During my freshman year at BSU, I was deeply involved in the world of the paranormal, though primarily from a skeptical standpoint. But tonight, something's different. I considered myself an amateur paranormal investigator and debunker. Leah, my new girlfriend, has an Ouija board, and it's calling to me. I began dating a girl called Leah. She possessed an old Ouija board, a fact that immediately piqued my interest. The board is ancient, its edges worn, letters faded. Leah believed the board had a dark history, claiming it was created by a satanic witch. She says it's cursed, but I laugh it off. One evening, before dinner, we decided to experiment with the board in her room. We sit cross-legged, fingers on the planchette, asking questions. Our session involved the typical question and answer format. It moves, spelling out cryptic answers, the planchette gliding across the letters and numbers in response to our inquiries. Is it us or something else? We're not alone. Leah's mom calls us for dinner, breaking the spell. Leah's mother called us down for dinner, bringing our session to an end. We pack the board away, but I feel its weight. We carefully place the Ouija board back in its box. Leah tosses it onto her dresser, over her Bible, in a seemingly casual gesture. Leah then tossed the box onto her dresser, where it landed on top of her Catholic Bible. We head downstairs, the air lighter. We then proceeded downstairs to eat, but the house feels wrong now, heavy with something unspoken. The room has changed. After dinner, we returned to Leah's room, planning a movie night. Following dinner, we returned to Leah's room to prepare for an outing to the movies. The sight stops us cold. The Ouija board was no longer on the dresser. It's on the bed, planchette centered. It lay on her bed, the planchette resting on the surface. The box is on the floor, flung open. The box that had contained the board was now on the floor. The Bible is in the trash can. It had fallen from the dresser and landed in the waste paper basket situated beside it. No one else lives here. Leah and her mother were the sole occupants of the house. It's not a prank. This eliminated any possibility of another person having entered the room and staged this unsettling scene. Leah's face pales, her hands shaking. The inexplicable repositioning of the Ouija board and the Bible deeply unnerved Leah. She wants it gone. She decided she wanted to rid herself of the object immediately. We're chaperoning a Catholic youth retreat soon. As it happened, we were scheduled to attend a Catholic youth group retreat the following weekend as chaperones. She plans to burn it there. Leah resolved to take the Ouija board with her to the retreat, planning to dispose of it in the large bonfire. The retreat is quiet. The bonfire roaring under a starless sky. True to her word, that is precisely what we did. We asked the priest's permission. Upon explaining the situation and our intentions to the priest overseeing the retreat, they were initially hesitant. He agrees, but warns us to be discreet. They eventually and reluctantly granted us permission to burn the board, stipulating that we should do so discreetly. Leah throws it into the flames. Leah removed the Ouija board and tossed it into the flames. The fire consumes it, but the woods answer. A cry erupts, raw, agonized, like someone burning alive. Sounds began to emanate from the nearby woods, noises that could only be described as someone in agonizing pain. The fire hides more. The sounds were chilling and reminiscent of someone being severely burnt. The priest blesses us, the ashes. The priest then offered a blessing for both of us and the ashes of the Ouija board, which we subsequently gathered and buried. We find a charred scrap in the embers, paper, with symbols like a script no one knows. What did we unleash? The remainder of the weekend passed without any further unusual occurrence. Leah's home stays quiet after. Leah and her mother also reported no subsequent issue at their home. But those cries echo in my mind. The piercing sounds that echoed from the woods that night remained a vivid and disturbing memory. I'm not a skeptic anymore. Excuse, what's still out there, tied to those ashes, waiting? Story number 8, The Spirit Board's Shadow. The pencils trembled, and the air turned cold, as if something unseen had joined us. One time I went to my friend's house, and she pulled out a couple of pencils. We played a game called Charlie Charlie. I laughed, thinking it was a childish prank, but the shadows knew better. A red glow circled us in a photo, proof we had opened a door that night. The spirit world claimed me, and it never let go. The snapshot froze my heart. A crimson ring trapped us in its frame. I thought this game was absolute BS until one of my friends took a photo of us playing the Charlie game together. It wasn't a glitch, not a trick of light. It was real. There was a red circle surrounding me and my friend in the photograph. The game wasn't a joke. It was a summons. And something answered, I believed, and fear took root. In the hospital shadows, we crafted a forbidden gate to the beyond. We were able to break glass bottles and create a Ouija board with the cardboard we found. The glass moved, unguided, whispering secrets no one should know. A spirit spoke, knowing things it couldn't, and we were hooked. But the darkness we invited wasn't friendly. It was waiting. The board betrayed us, its voice turning cold and ancient. We asked who we were speaking to, and they mentioned this Latin name. The name was a curse. its meaning tied to something unholy. We looked up the Latin name, and it was something scary. We'd gone too far, and the spirit wasn't leaving. It wanted more than answers. It wanted us. Home wasn't safe anymore. The spirit followed, slamming doors in rage. One time the door slammed shut behind me. Windows defied physics, closing with force no human could muster. The bathroom windows slammed shut out of nowhere. The air grew heavy, charged with a presence that knew my name. We'd brought something back, and it wasn't leaving without a fight. Ghosts and demons were my obsession, a thrill I chased through every haunted tale. I was a crazy girl growing up, and I've always been fascinated with ghosts and demons and haunted stories. At 15, I was fearless, laughing at the supernatural, daring it to prove itself. That changed at my friend's house, where a simple game became a gateway. Charlie Charlie, a pencil ritual to summon a spirit, seemed like nonsense. This game basically connects you to a spirit called Charlie, and you get to ask him yes or no questions. And depending on the way the pencil moves, dictates whether it's a yes or a no. We played, giggling, asking silly questions, but the air shifted, growing thick. A friend snapped a photo, and the image stopped us cold. A red circle, unnatural and vivid, framed us. And ever since then, I believed in the Charlie Charlie game. It wasn't a game anymore. It was a warning. The spirit world had noticed us, and it wasn't letting go. I carried that belief into darker days when life led me to St. Vincent's, a place where shadows thrived. The hospital was a maze of sterile halls and broken spirits, a place where time dragged. I joined a program there, blending school with therapy, a routine to anchor us. But the gym, with its abandoned stage, held secrets. Rec time was held in the gym, and what looked like an abandoned stage, behind the stage, we found glass bottles and cardboard, relics of neglect. The staff barely watched, giving us freedom to explore and to create. We fashioned a Ouija board, crude but potent, from shattered glass and scrawled letters. We did the Ouija board as best we could and began playing immediately. The glass moved, slow at first, then with purpose, as if guided by an unseen hand. We felt the glass move and were all very freaked out. I scoffed, suspecting my friends were pushing it, but doubt crept in. A spirit named CJ joined us, his presence undeniable. Basically, a boy called CJ came to use the board with us. He knew things, my dad's middle name, my brother's, mine, secrets I'd never shared, until CJ told me my dad's middle name, my brother's middle name, and mine. CJ's voice was soft, a whisper through the glass, telling us his story. He'd been a patient here, trapped in these walls, his life cut short by despair. He lingered, tied to the hospital, unwilling to leave. We were captivated, playing daily, asking CJ about his world, his pain. As the days go by, we continued to talk to CJ on the Ouija board. For 2 weeks, he was our secret, a friend from beyond, proof the board was real. We continued to play with the Ouija board for about 2 weeks, but CJ faded, his answers slowing, then stopping. We pressed the glass, demanding to know who was there. The answer chilled us. A Latin name, unfamiliar but heavy with menace. We searched it, and the meaning was tied to darkness, to something ancient and cruel. Fear replaced our thrill. We'd crossed a line. We tried to discard the Ouija board after that. We couldn't burn it. Security was tight. No lighters allowed. We couldn't set it on fire because we didn't have access to lighters, and we got checked for stuff before we were able to enter the building. We tore the board apart, shredding the cardboard, and buried it in the hospital's backyard. So, what we did was ripped it into pieces and buried it in the backyard. It felt wrong, incomplete, like we'd only angered what we'd summoned. I'm not sure if this was the right way. It probably wasn't. The hospital felt heavier after that, its shadows deeper, its silence louder. I left St. Vincent's soon after, returning to normal school. But the darkness followed us. Home was no refuge. The living room door, heavy and stubborn, began to move on its own. It closed with force, the carpet no match for its will. I dismissed it, but unease grew. Then my dad spoke of the bathroom window, a sticky, painted frame that couldn't close easily. It had slammed shut during his bath, defying its mechanism. He thought it was really strange because with the kind of window we had, it can't slam. The window's latch was firm, yet it had moved with purpose. So for it to slam shut, someone had to slam it shut for real. The incidents piled up, each one a thread in a web we couldn't see. I told Dad about the door, and his story echoed mine. After I heard that, I let them know about the living door. Mom's eyes narrowed, her voice sharp with worry. And my mom asked, "What games am I playing? Did I bring the devil into the house?" I confessed everything. The Charlie Charlie game, the Ouija board, Si Chua, the Latin name. I told her what I did in St. Vincent's. I told her the game that me and my friend would play. Mom acted fast, calling my grandmother a woman of faith who knew the old ways. She arrived with holy water, her prayers a shield against the unseen. She immediately called my grandmother to get holy water and bless the whole house and everyone in it. They focused on my room, dousing it in sacred water, their chants filling the air. They specifically overly blessed my room. And from that day on, nothing strange happened. The house grew still, the doors silent, the windows unmoved. The presence was gone, banished by faith. I look back, shaken by what we invited. The red circle, the moving glass, the slamming doors, they were real, not tricks of the mind. These are real stories, by the way. This is my real-life experience, and none of this is made up. I'm grateful to be free of it. The weight lifted. I'm just glad to be rid whatever we brought with the Charlie Charlie game. But the memory lingers. A warning etched in my soul. I don't touch spirit games anymore. Don't dare the dark to answer. The hospital, the board, the Latin name, they haunt me. Shadows in quiet moments. I see the glass moving in my dreams. Hear his name whispered in the wind. The house is calm now, but I check the doors. Listen for sounds that don't belong. Something crossed over that day, and though it's gone, it left a mark. The spirit world is real, and it's not a game. It's a door you don't close easily. Story number 9. The Cry at the Tracks. The park wasn't just empty. It was alive with something dark. Under the vast night sky, Claire and her friend Mark ventured to a secluded city outside town, drawn by the allure of stars and the promise of the unknown. The air was still, but a presence lingered, waiting to scream its warning. I was friends with someone who had never experienced the paranormal and was intrigued by my stories. Mark, a skeptic, wanted to test the supernatural with a Ouija board. He said he wanted to try a Ouija board to see what would happen, but their curiosity would lead them to a place where the past refused to rest. So, I brought a cheap laminated paperboard off eBay and we went to a park outside of town that night. Their first attempt was a bust, the paperboard silent under their fingers. We tried it, but nothing happened. Claire, who'd once tried a homemade Ouija as a teen, knew they needed something real. Now, I had only tried once before when I was around 40. They ordered a wooden board. Its arrival days away. We decided we needed an actual board, so I ordered one made of wood from eBay. While waiting, the park became their refuge, a place to swing and stargaze. While waiting for the delivery, we often went to this park at night to swing on the swings and look at stars, which were more visible out there. But the path to the park held a secret, one that would shatter their calm. To get there, you have to park, walk across from the train tracks, and pass the train station itself. The old train station, abandoned save for coal trains, loomed over the tracks. It's not really a stop for trains anymore, only for events, but a number of coal trains do pass through it. They'd crossed it countless times, but one night everything changed. As we were walking across, like we had many times before, I reached the platform and suddenly something felt off. Claire froze, a wave of dread washing over her, as if evil itself stood nearby. Instinctively, I stopped dead in my tracks. I felt like something evil, I guess would be the closest word, was present. She urged Mark to leave, her panic unmistakable. I told my friend I wasn't going any further and wanted to leave immediately. Mark hesitated, then heard it, a cry, like a baby's, echoing down the tracks. That's when we heard what sounded like a baby crying down the tracks. They turned to flee, but the sound followed, louder, closer, right behind them. As we turned and began walking away, we heard the same sound again, only louder and right behind us. They didn't look back. Sprinting to the car, hearts pounding. We didn't look back. We just ran to the car and sped off. Mark, shaken by his first brush with the unknown, and Claire, chilled by its intensity, swore off the park. He was terrified because this was his first experience, and I was terrified because I'd never felt anything like that before. We never went back. The Ouija board arrived, and they chose a new site, wary but determined. When the Ouija board finally arrived, we decided to go somewhere else at sunset to try it. The pointer moved, gliding silently, its motion unnatural, as if guided by an unseen hand. This time, the pointer actually moved. Mark accused Claire of cheating, but she insisted it was real. My friend accused me of moving it, but I told him I wasn't stupid. The board spoke, warning them of the park's evil, a truth they couldn't ignore. We asked about the things at the other park, and it warned us not to go back there because it was evil. The cry at the tracks wasn't just a sound, it was a summons. Safe to say I never did, nor did I want to. Claire cut ties with Mark, but the park shadow lingered. I'm no longer friends with this person, so I don't care if he goes back, but I know I won't. She learned the station's grim history from co-workers, a camp for rail workers, where children vanished into wombat holes, never found. They told me the train station used to be a camp for workers when the tracks were being built way back when. Families used to live there, and apparently young children would sometimes wander off and fall into wombat holes, never to be found. The cries were theirs, trapped in time, calling out. After that, I no longer went stargazing at night in isolated park side of town. Claire moved on, avoiding isolated places, her nights now spent indoors. But the cry echoed in her dreams, a plea she couldn't answer. She researched the station, finding old reports of missing children, their fates sealed in the earth. Were they still there, or was something else mimicking their voices? She joined a paranormal forum, sharing her story to seek answers. Others had heard the cries, felt the same dread at abandoned sites. The park wasn't just haunted, it was a trap, luring the curious. Then came the night that broke her silence. A package arrived, no sender, containing a wooden Ouija pointer, identical to the one she'd used. Scratched into it was a single word: listen. Claire destroyed it, but the fear took root. Was the park still calling, or had it followed her home? She installed cameras, kept her doors locked, and avoided train tracks. The cry at the tracks wasn't just a memory, it was a warning she'd carry forever. Story number 10, The Ouija's Curse. You're young, curious, gathered with friends in a darkened room, fingers trembling on a Ouija board. The air thickens, and something answers. Something that knows too much. What have you invited in? A harmless spirit, or a force that clings to you, twisting your life in ways you can't explain? Shadows move, doors open, and your world unravels. The board promised answers, but it delivered chaos. This isn't just a game gone wrong. It's a descent into a nightmare, where the line between reality and the unseen blurs. Years later, you still feel it, a wind, a whisper, a warning. What did you unleash that night? The move to a quiet French town for my studies felt like a new chapter, a chance to explore ideas and forge bins. I quickly made friends with two people, two boys, one a year older than me and the other a few years older. Antoine and Karim, my new companions, shared my curiosity for life's big questions. We got on really well, and in the space of a few weeks, we already felt like we'd known each other for years. Our talks ranged from philosophy to the paranormal, a topic that gripped us all. We discussed every conceivable subject. The subject of belief in the paranormal came up soon, raised without religion. I was drawn to spiritual exploration, not bound by dogma, but open to mystery. I was brought up in an atheist family, but that doesn't mean I'm atheist. I was more into spiritual research because the subject really fascinated me and I felt a need to delve into it. Antoine, with his talk of shamanism, seemed enlightened, while Karim shared our quest for truth. My other two friends, Antoine and Karim, were also both on a spiritual path, but Antoine seemed more interested in the question as long as we saw him as advanced. He talked about shamanism and other New Age beliefs. Their passion was contagious, but it led us somewhere dark. As I didn't have a fixed idea about these things, I was impressed. Our fascination culminated in a daring idea, an Ouija board. As we talked about it, we were tempted to try an experiment. Karim gifted one to Antoine, and we gathered at his place, setting the stage with candles and dimmed lights. Antoine's birthday was coming up, and Kim decided to give him a Ouija board. That evening, we decided to get in the spirit of things at Antoine's house by turning off the lights, closing the shutters, and lighting candles. As a horror fan, I was skeptical but intrigued. It was a first for all of us. I was of course, well versed in horror films and what went on in them. But deep down, I thought this wasn't going to work. To my shock, the planchette moved, spelling out answers. However, very quickly the drop began to move on the board. We stayed respectful, asking simple questions, somewhat surprised. I remained silent, and Antoine did the same. Karim, for his part, took the lead and asked fairly basic questions. Who are you? What's your name? I should point out that despite my skepticism about the practice, we did things respectfully and without laughing as other people might do. Was it real or just us? Doubting, I blamed the ideomotor effect. As time went by, my skepticism grew and said it must be the idiomote effect. Karim challenged me to ask a personal question without touching the board. Karim suggested that I remove my fingers and ask questions only I could answer. I asked for a family member, and the board spelled my grandfather's name, a secret I'd never shared. Quickly and stupidly, I asked to speak to someone from my family. Something seemed to come up. I asked who it was, and immediately a letter appeared, and then another, until a name was formed. That was of my grandfather, who had died 2 years earlier. I could feel the blood in my body run cold because I'd never mentioned him to my friends. Specific details followed, chillingly accurate. To be sure, I kept asking for more specific questions that I'm sure Antoine and Karim had absolutely no idea the answers to. Everything fit, exhausted. We stopped, and I collapsed into sleep. Confused, we ended the session, and immediately afterwards, I felt exhausted. I went home that evening and slept like a log. That night changed everything. More sessions followed, but the board's responses grew vague, mocking, as if toying with us. We had more sessions, but the further we went, the more cynical, imprecise, and often mocking the answers became. Were we being deceived? I was beginning to wonder if we weren't being played because, yes, at that point, I was convinced we really were talking to someone by the board. My life began to unravel. More and more things began to go wrong for me. After one session, a crushing chest pain left me nauseous. Once after a session, I almost threw up because I felt such an excruciating tightness in my chest. I snapped at friends, my mood swinging wildly. I became irritated and nasty with my friends. Karim later recounted a cruel outburst I couldn't recall, wounding him deeply. A few months later, Karim told me that one day in class, I had spoken to him in such a horrible way. He'd been genuinely hurt by my behavior, something I have no memory of. What was happening to me? I had a lot of mood swings, and people close to me really wondered what was going on with me. I blamed stress. But the irrational crept in, making dark corners feel alive. For me, I was thinking about the stress of studying, and above all, the thought of something irrational in my life. Even someone who doesn't really believe in all of that will start feeling things in their life. Be afraid of a dark place and so on. It's quite a human reaction. The disturbances weren't just internal. These events lasted about 2 years, with fluctuations. Sometimes it was very strong, and sometimes it was more or less calm. At my apartment, during a session, Karim asked for a sign, and knocks echoed from a wall with no neighbor behind it. But there were also external factors in these behaviors, like during a session in my home. This time, Karim asked for a physical manifestation of the entity we were talking to, and several bangs of different entities were heard in my wall. And the ironic thing is that there's no neighbor behind that wall. Another time, the board answered death, and a candle extinguished only to reignite post-session. On another occasion during a session, a question whose title I can no longer remember, the answer we received was death. Just then, the candle we had on a piece of furniture went out. That same candle lit up again immediately at the end of the session. Kareem filmed it, proof I no longer have access to. It may seem incredible, but it was all filmed by Kareem, who wanted to keep a record of these sessions. Even though I don't speak to him anymore for other reasons, the video must still exist in the memory of his phone if he hasn't deleted it. Shadows darted in my apartment, fleeting glimpses at odd hours. I often saw small shadows moving very quickly from the corner of my eye in specific places in my flat. I'd seen similar as a child, and my father had too. I should point out that when I was young, I had already seen shadows moving very quickly between two hedges, and I recently learned that my father had seen something similar too. These visions didn't happen in the evening, but rather in the early afternoon. One afternoon, a woman in white stared from the street, vanishing instantly. My window looked out onto a moderately busy street, and I was doing some housework in the afternoon when I saw a woman in white staring at me from the street. Half a moment later, she had vanished. In the cellar, a hatted figure appeared, gone when I looked again later. I learned of the Hatman. Sometime later, I was taking my bins down to the cellar, very gloomy, and as I was leaving the premises, I saw a man on my left in front of another door. I turned to greet him, thinking he was my neighbor, but nothing. The man was wearing a hat. It was only after some research that I learned of the existence of what others call the Hat Man. A slice of bread leaped off my table, landing precisely back in place. As I was eating while watching a series, the bread on my left jumped 10 centimeters before falling back in place at the exact same location on the table. No earthquake, no explanation. I thought it was an earthquake, but nothing else had moved. Friends laughed when I shared it, when I told my friends about the jumping bread. No one believed me, and they obviously laughed at me. My relationships suffered. I lived in my flat for 5 years and went through 2 relationships fairly quickly. One ex fled after the bathroom door opened on its own. Defying the floor's slant, my ex once broke up with me in a panic because she'd seen the bathroom door open by itself. Another, rational by nature, was shaken by the same. Another ex saw the same thing and told me she didn't understand that despite being a very rational soul, she'd been confused. I should point out there were no windows open. What's more, the door to my bathroom closed by itself, probably because of the incline in the floor. But in the cases where my exes had seen the door, it was the other way around. In other words, you had to push it. A water bottle rolled to my feet unprompted. One evening on my way home, the empty water bottle, the one I had put next to the bin, fell over and rolled onto my feet. Was it the wind? Well, that could have been easy to explain. My TV's volume spiked, the remote untouched. There was one time my ex and I were cooking, and the TV was on. It was a cheap TV, and the remote control didn't work all that well. You had to really be in front of the TV to increase the sound or change channels. The remote control was on the kitchen table, so not in front of the TV at all. But the sound increased drastically. It happened again, erratic, as if someone toyed with it, And the next day, the same thing happened, but the sound increased more episodially, as if someone had pressed the button several times and wasn't holding it down. Reality felt fragile. In a church, I saw Kareem exit impossibly fast, unseen until he was outside. Kareem and I went to a church, and he sat in the front row. After a while, I decided to leave the church and go sit on a wall facing the wide open door of the building. I can still see Kareem with his back to me, sitting in the front row, when suddenly a noise drew my attention to the right, and I looked around for a few moments and looked back at the church and saw Kim leaving. I asked him how he could have got out of there so quickly. He told me that when he heard me coming out, he got up too. In short, I should have seen him walk towards the exit, but I didn't. There was obviously no one in the room. There was obviously no one in that church apart from us. Rosaries appeared mysteriously, first at my doorstep, then my doormat. One evening, after an event with Kareem, he was leaving my house to go home when he called me to come downstairs. When I went to look, I saw a rosary on the doorstep. He told me he'd called me straight away, almost having stepped on it on his way out. 2 weeks later, I got home and on my doormat, the door to my flat this time, there was another wooden rosary. I kept one, a talisman against the unknown. I took it with me and still have it. 2 years of torment taught me a lesson. So, in conclusion, after using the Ouija board, I thought I was going mad for about 2 years. And despite periods of calm, the events kept coming back. I swore off Ouija boards and divination, seeking peace through faith. I swore I'd never do it again or any other form of divination or spiritualism. I did many of the things I needed to do to stop the manifestations. Antoine left school, and my friendship with Kareem faded with time. Anton stopped studying and went back to his native region, and I stopped talking to Kim. Christianity brought calm, though the memories lingered. Today, I'm closer to Christianity and haven't really had anything as disturbing as I'm used to. I don't claim truth, only experience. Once again, this is just one experience among many, and I don't claim to hold any truth. Some called me paranoid, but I know my mistake. Some say I'm paranoid, ridiculous, or crazy, or whatever. But I think that I made a huge mistake placing my fingers on that board that night. Never touch a Ouija board. And if I have any advice for you, it would be not to touch one, whether you believe it or not. The disturbances waned, but traces remained. What had we awakened? I found a journal in my apartment left by a previous tenant, noting strange noises and a man in a hat at night. Was it the same entity? Elders in town spoke of spirits drawn to reckless curiosity, warning of doors once opened. Had we left one ajar? My new faith grounded me, but dark corners still held menace. Some mistakes echo forever.